In the annals of modern mysteries, few stories have captured the imagination quite like the tale of the Philadelphia experiment. It is a story that drifts between documented wartime history and whispered legend, between military secrecy and science fiction. To speak of it is to step into the uncertain borderland where fact and rumor blur, and where the limits of human ingenuity are said to have been pushed beyond the ordinary laws of physics. Whether one accepts it as truth, regards it as myth, or suspects it as a blend of both, the Philadelphia experiment remains one of the 20th century's most haunting enigmas. The story begins in the early 1942, during the height of the Second World War. The United States Navy, like every military force engaged in the conflict, was searching desperately for technological advantages that might tilt the balance of power in its favor. German submarines prowled the Atlantic with lethal efficiency, sinking American and Allied ships by the dozens. Protecting convoys and troop transports was not just a matter of strategy, it was survival itself. In this climate of secrecy, research, and frantic innovation, rumors began to spread of a daring and unprecedented experiment carried out at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard in 1943. According to the legend, a destroyer escort, the USS Eldridge, was subjected to a test that would forever place it at the heart of conspiracy lore. The supposed goal of the experiment was to render the ship invisible to enemy detection. At first, invisibility might sound like something drawn from the pages of fantasy, but in wartime laboratories across the globe, scientists were working tirelessly on radar countermeasures, stealth coatings, and electromagnetic shielding. The idea of making a ship undetectable was not completely out of place in this fevered climate of innovation. What the legend suggests, however, is that the Navy's ambitions went far beyond camouflage or electronic jamming. The tale insists that the Eldridge was subjected to a powerful electromagnetic field generated by massive coils of equipment installed on board, and that this field bent light itself, cloaking the ship from view. Some versions go further, claiming that not only did the ship vanish from sight, but it was also transported through time and space. It is here that the story begins to slide from the realm of plausible research into the domain of the extraordinary. Witnesses would later claim that when the experiment was conducted, a greenish-blue haze enveloped the ship. Slowly, incredibly, the outline of the vessel grew faint, until at last it vanished altogether. Observers reported only the shimmering of disturbed water where the hull had once been. For a few moments, or perhaps several minutes, the USS Eldridge was simply gone, and then, just as suddenly, it reappeared, materializing back in its berth as though nothing had happened. But according to legend, something had happened, something terrible. The men aboard the ship were said to have been profoundly affected. Some staggered about in disorientation. Others suffered burns and radiation-like injuries. The most disturbing accounts claimed that certain crew members had been fused into the metal of the ship itself, their bodies half buried in steel bulkheads, screaming in agony. Still, others supposedly vanished entirely, never to return. The Philadelphia experiment, as it came to be called, has been retold in countless versions since the 1952nd. Each telling varies in its details, but the core elements remain the same: a wartime experiment in invisibility, a vanished ship, and horrifying consequences for the men who participated. But how did this legend take root, and why has it endured for decades despite the absence of verifiable evidence? To answer these questions, we must look not only at the context of wartime research, but also at the strange circumstances under which the story first emerged. The earliest known public mention of the Philadelphia experiment came not in a newspaper or a wartime report, but in a set of letters written in the mid-1952. The recipient of these letters was a writer named Morris K. Jessup, who had authored a book on unidentified flying objects. Jessup was contacted by a mysterious correspondent, a man named Carlos Miguel Allende, though sometimes the name was given as Carl Allen. Allende claimed to have witnessed the extraordinary disappearance of the Eldridge firsthand while serving aboard another vessel. In his rambling, sometimes incoherent letters, he described the events in detail, insisting that he had seen the ship vanish and reappear, and that the experiment was based on the theories of none other than Albert Einstein. At the time, Einstein's ideas of relativity and the relationship between space, time, and electromagnetism were already revolutionizing physics. Allende suggested that the Navy had applied Einstein's so-called unified field theory, an unfinished attempt to combine the forces of nature into a single set of equations, and that the result was the bending of light and gravity around the Eldridge. To many, this sounded like science fiction. Yet Allende's claims did not go unnoticed. Copies of his annotated letters to Jessup were eventually circulated among military circles, and the legend began to spread. Jessup himself was a man caught in the fringes of both science and pseudoscience. Though trained in astronomy, his career had not flourished in academia, and he instead devoted himself to writing about UFOs and other mysteries. When he received Allende's letters, he was intrigued, but also skeptical. He noted the eccentric tone and wild leaps of speculation. Nevertheless, he took the matter seriously enough to share it with others, and before long, the Philadelphia experiment was becoming a topic of whispered discussion in paranormal and conspiracy communities. Jessup's life ended tragically in 1959 when he was found dead in his car in what was officially ruled a suicide. But his association with the Philadelphia experiment cemented the story's reputation as something more than idle gossip. To believers, Jessup's death was further evidence that powerful forces were trying to suppress the truth. What complicates the story is the way in which it intertwines real scientific concepts with wild speculation. Invisibility, for instance, was indeed an area of genuine wartime research. The U.S. Navy and its allies experimented with degaussing using electric cables to create magnetic fields that would reduce a ship's magnetic signature, protecting it from magnetic mines. They also worked on radar countermeasures, painting ships with special coatings or fitting them with devices that could confuse enemy detection. It is not difficult to imagine how stories of such work, shrouded in military secrecy, could evolve into tales of invisibility fields and disappearing ships. Add to this the awe surrounding Einstein's theories, and the ground was fertile for a legend to grow. Witness testimony, too, played its part. Though the Navy has always denied that the Philadelphia experiment took place, a handful of supposed eyewitnesses emerged over the years, each adding fuel to the fire. Some claimed to have seen the green haze around the ship. Others insisted they had spoken to sailors who suffered strange after effects, disorientation, memory loss, or even spontaneous teleportation. One oft-repeated story told of men who would vanish into thin air in taverns, only to reappear seconds later in a different part of the room. These tales, sensational as they were never corroborated with hard evidence. Yet they spread quickly in the years after the war, when public fascination with UFOs, secret weapons, and Cold War conspiracies was at its height. By the 1972nd and 1982nd, the Philadelphia experiment had become a fixture in the landscape of American mystery lore. Books were written about it, documentaries speculated on it, and even a Hollywood film brought the story to a mass audience. In this popularized version, the Eldridge was not merely rendered invisible, but hurled hundreds of miles away in an instant, only to reappear in Philadelphia minutes later. Such embellishments only deepen the legend's hold on the imagination. The blending of science, horror, and conspiracy proved irresistible. And yet, beneath the fantastic claims, certain basic questions linger. Did anything of the sort really happen at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard in 1943? Was the USS Eldridge, a very real destroyer escort that served during World War II, ever subjected to unusual experiments? Or was the entire tale the product of one man's vivid imagination, amplified by a culture hungry for mysteries? To approach these questions, we must look more closely at the details of the Eldridge's actual service history and at what was technologically possible during the 1942nd. We must examine the plausibility of electromagnetic invisibility, and we must also consider the psychological and cultural factors that allow such legends to thrive. Only then can we begin to untangle the threads of the Philadelphia experiment, a story that refuses to vanish, even as skeptics dismiss it as fantasy. The USS Eldridge itself was not a figment of imagination. It was a real destroyer escort, designated DE-173, commissioned in August 1943 and assigned to convoy escort duties in the Atlantic. Records show that the ship spent the war protecting supply convoys traveling between the United States and North Africa. After the war, it was transferred to the Greek Navy and served under a new name until it was finally decommissioned in the 1992nd. On paper, its service history appears ordinary. There are no official mentions of strange experiments, of vanishing acts, or of crew members mysteriously fused with steel. Yet, believers in the Philadelphia experiment insist that this is exactly what one would expect if the Navy were covering up something monumental. According to Navy records, the Eldridge was never even in Philadelphia during the period when the experiment supposedly occurred. Logbooks and convoy schedules place it in other locations, far from the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. Skeptics point to these records as proof that the story is a fabrication, but proponents counter that if the government could make a ship invisible, it could just as easily alter its logbooks. The absence of evidence, they argue, is evidence of a cover-up. And so the debate continues, circling endlessly between the official record and the persistent legend. One of the enduring elements of the Philadelphia experiment myth is the claim that the ship not only vanished, but also teleported hundreds of miles away. This part of the story often points to the Norfolk Naval Yard in Virginia. Eyewitnesses claim the Eldridge was seen there briefly, materializing out of thin air before vanishing once again. To this day, no concrete evidence supports the notion, but the image of a warship blinking in and out of existence is one that has seared itself into the imagination. It is a vision of science unchecked, of power beyond control, and of men caught in forces they cannot comprehend. For those inclined to skepticism, the technological impossibility of such an experiment in the 1942nd is enough to dismiss the story. To bend light around an object on the scale of a naval vessel would require not only an understanding of advanced theoretical physics, far beyond what was then available, but also an energy source of unimaginable magnitude. Even today, with all our modern advances, cloaking technology remains in its infancy, capable of hiding only small objects under carefully controlled conditions. The idea of rendering an entire destroyer invisible, let alone teleporting it through space, stretches credibility past its breaking point. And yet, legends are not constrained by the boundaries of what is possible. They thrive precisely because they dance on the edge of plausibility, hinting at secrets just beyond our grasp. For those who believe, the Philadelphia experiment represents a glimpse of hidden knowledge, a demonstration that the military achieved something extraordinary and then buried the truth. For others, it is a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked science, a myth that reflects our fears of technology spiraling out of control. The human cost of the story is also a vital part of its enduring power. The accounts of sailors who were allegedly fused into the ship's bulkheads, their bodies grotesquely merged with steel, are as horrifying as any nightmare. These images are not merely technical claims, they are visceral, emotional, unforgettable. They suggest that the experiment was not just a scientific failure, but a moral catastrophe, sacrificing human beings in the pursuit of power. Whether real or imagined, these images have burned themselves into the folklore of the 20th century. Over the decades, the Philadelphia experiment has intersected with other areas of conspiracy lore. Some versions of the story claim that the experiment opened a rift in time, hurling the Eldridge into the future or even into another dimension. In these tellings, the ship's disappearance is not simply invisibility, but a journey across the fabric of space-time itself. The sailors, it is said, experienced bizarre effects. Some emerged from the experiment unable to remain anchored in time, slipping in and out of the present, vanishing for hours or days before reappearing. Others, the story goes, lost their sanity, unable to cope with the disorientation of having touched another reality. These details move the tale firmly into the realm of science fiction, yet they are repeated with conviction by those who believe. By the late 20th century, the Philadelphia experiment had become part of a broader cultural fascination with secret government projects. The Cold War era was fertile ground for such stories. With the CIA conducting real experiments like MK-Ultra, in which mind-altering drugs were tested on unwitting subjects, it did not seem impossible to imagine the Navy attempting equally outlandish experiments in physics. In a world where governments demonstrably lied, withheld information, and pursued strange scientific projects, the Philadelphia experiment seemed plausible enough to many. The legend was further cemented in the public mind by the 1984 film, The Philadelphia Experiment. In this Hollywood retelling, the ship vanishes and is transported not just across space, but decades into the future. The film, though fictional, introduced millions of viewers to the concept, blending fact and fantasy in a way that ensured the story would never fade. It tapped into deep cultural anxieties about technology, secrecy, and the unknown, ensuring that even those who had never heard of Carlos Allende or Morris Jessup would come to know the words Philadelphia Experiment. Yet, even as the legend spread, skeptics continued to dismantle its foundations. Researchers who examined the story noted that Carlos Allende, the original source, was known for fabrications and eccentric claims. His letters were rambling, filled with scientific jargon used incorrectly, and often contradictory. There is no credible documentation linking Einstein to any naval invisibility project, nor is there any evidence that the USS Eldridge was ever equipped with the kind of massive equipment described in the tales. Historians of naval warfare point out that the real experiments involving magnetic fields degaussing were relatively mundane procedures designed to protect against mines, not to render ships invisible. Still, debunking has never fully erased belief. Conspiracies thrive in the spaces where documentation is scarce and imagination is strong. For every skeptic pointing to naval records, there is a believer insisting that those records were altered. For every historian who explains degaussing in practical terms, there is a storyteller who insists that official explanations are cover stories. The Philadelphia Experiment, like so many conspiracy legends, lives on not because of evidence, but because of doubt. It offers the tantalizing possibility that there are things we are not meant to know, that the truth lies hidden behind walls of secrecy. Some theorists even connect the Philadelphia Experiment to later projects, such as the so-called Montauk Project of the 1982nd, which allegedly involved time travel and mind control experiments at a secret base in New York. In this expanded mythology, the Philadelphia Experiment was only the beginning, the first stumble into a world of hidden science and interdimensional travel. The connections are tenuous at best, but they illustrate how one legend can grow, intertwining with others until it becomes part of a vast web of mystery. Today, the Philadelphia Experiment occupies a strange place in cultural memory. It is not quite history, not quite science fiction, but something in between. It has been investigated by skeptics, dramatized by filmmakers, and whispered about by conspiracy theorists for generations. For some, it remains proof that governments conceal incredible technologies from the public. For others, it is a cautionary tale about the dangers of blurring science and imagination. And for still others, it is simply a captivating story, one that endures because it speaks to our deepest fears and fascinations. What is perhaps most remarkable is the way the legend has outlasted its original teller, Carlos Allende. The man who first wrote to Morris Jessup has long since passed into obscurity. His credibility was never strong, his evidence never compelling. Yet the story he told has taken on a life of its own, far exceeding the power of its originator. This is the nature of myth. It grows, it changes, it survives, because people want it to survive. So what are we to make of the Philadelphia Experiment? Was it real, a glimpse of a secret wartime project that succeeded in bending the laws of physics? Was it a misunderstanding of ordinary naval procedures, exaggerated into legend by an eccentric storyteller? Or was it something else altogether, a reflection of our collective hopes and fears about science, secrecy, and the unknown? Perhaps the truth is less important than the story itself. The Philadelphia Experiment endures because it offers us something we crave: mystery. In a world where so much seems explained, where science and technology strip away the unknown, we cling to those stories that defy explanation. They remind us that not everything can be neatly categorized, that some corners of the human experience remain shadowed. Whether real or imagined, the tale of the disappearing ship continues to haunt our imaginations, a ghost of the Second World War that refuses to vanish. And so, the Philadelphia Experiment remains one of the most compelling legends of the 20th century. Its details shift with each retelling, its plausibility debated endlessly, its evidence forever elusive. But its impact is undeniable. It has inspired books, films, and generations of speculation. It stands as a testament to the power of stories to outlive their origins, to grow beyond their creators, and to capture the imagination of millions. In the end, perhaps the USS Eldridge never vanished into thin air. Perhaps no sailors were fused with steel, no ship teleported across the sea. But the legend itself has achieved a kind of immortality. It has slipped free of the boundaries of history and entered the realm of myth. Like the green haze that supposedly enveloped the Eldridge, the story drifts on the edges of our vision, uncertain, elusive, impossible to pin down. And maybe that is why it endures. Because in that uncertainty lies wonder, and in wonder lies the heartbeat of every great mystery.